Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Transit Database webinar for reduced reporters. Thank you very much for joining us today. All right. The contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA statutes and regulations for applicable National Transit Database requirements. Here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require technical assistance while completing your report or accessing our published data products, please feel free to call or email our help desk line between the hours of 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Matt Oliver, and I'm joined here today with Daniel Barnes, who will also be presenting. Our contact information is listed here if you have any questions about this presentation, or you can also contact your assigned analyst. Here's the agenda for this afternoon. We will review the basic policies of NTD reporting, including a reporting overview, as well as touching on some policy clarifications and new requirements for this year. We will then discuss how to get started in the NTD reporting system, how to kick off and complete the annual report, how to submit the report through the system, and we will briefly review the validation and revision process. First, we will begin with an overview of the Reduced Reporter module. Who reports to the NTD? Agencies that are recipients or beneficiaries of FTA 5307 Urbanized Area Formula Program funds or FTA 5311 Rural Area Formula Program funds are required to report to the NTD. In 2018, with the implementation of the new TAM rule, any recipients of FTA Chapter 53 funds are required to report to the NTD if they operate public transit. These agencies are public transportation providers that may include direct transit providers, state departments of transportation and their subrecipients, as well as metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs. Transit agencies are welcome to report their public transit data to the NTD on a voluntary basis, even if they do not currently receive these funds. The data from these reports contributes to apportionments for the urbanized areas, or UZAs. Within the urban module of the NTD, reduced reporters are transit agencies who operate 30 or fewer vehicles in their peak maximum service. They also do not operate on any fixed guideway, such as rail or fixed catenary systems. For those who report as a reduced reporter, these agencies do not report data related to passenger miles and their service. They also do not report monthly service statistics or monthly safety data. Agencies have 4 months after their fiscal year ends to complete their NTD reports. For example, if your fiscal year ends on June 30th, the deadline for submission is October 31st. And the reports must be closed out or finalized by March 15th of the following year. We have 3 primary groups of fiscal year reporting deadlines. They're listed here in the table. Next, we'll cover what to report. Agencies must report all public transportation services, whether they are operated by your agency directly or contracted out as purchased transportation. Public transit must be regular, continuing, shared ride, and open to the public or a segment of the public, such as seniors or persons with disabilities. You must report all assets, expenditures, and service data associated with these services. In your financial data, you should report the total annual costs of your service, regardless of whether it was federally or locally funded. And you should only report services for which your agency is responsible for covering the full cost. You must report data that is specific to each mode and type of service you operate, such as bus, demand response, van pool, and so on. Be sure to collect and report service data and financial data by each separate mode. Additionally, ensure that you report actual data rather than data that is based on calculations or estimates. You should report all direct as well as indirect expenses related to the service, also regardless of the funding source. Here is the general flow of the NTD reporting process. All agencies begin with reporting training and familiarizing themselves with the NTD policy manual. The agencies compile and collect their data once their fiscal year ends. Then, the agencies enter it into the NTD system and submit it for their first review. And their assigned analysts will review the data and send it back with revisions or requested clarifications. Once the report is finalized, it is sent to FTA for approval, and then the data is eventually published on the NTD website for general public use. There are some key reference documents available online. These include the NTD Glossary, Annual Reporting User Guide, Reduced Reporting Policy Manual, and the Uniform System of Accounts, or USOA. We have also compiled a frequently asked questions page, which you can find on our homepage. If you have any suggestions for the FAQ page, please feel free to reach out to your analysts. Next, we will discuss the changes and clarifications for the 2021 report year. We will begin with clarifications during the COVID-19 national public health emergency. The first clarification we will review is service applicability. Emergency services carried out by transit operators in coordination with medical centers or emergency management agencies in response to COVID-19 do not meet the FTA definition of public transportation. Non-passenger services that your agency provides under contract, which do not involve the transport of passengers, such as meal deliveries program, do not meet the FTA definition of public transportation. How will COVID-19 affect the apportionment of FTA funds? You probably know the policy that FTA published for the 2022 apportionment, which is based on reported 2020 data. In that apportionment, FTA used either report year 2019 or report year 2020 data, whichever had the higher vehicle revenue miles, or VRM. FTA did not mix and match data from different years. It used either all of your 2019 data or all of your 2020 data. This ensures that agencies that had large service decreases are treated fairly in the apportionment. The 2023 apportionment will be very similar. FTA will use either 2019 or 2021 reported data, whichever has a higher total VRM. Like last year, you can request that FTA use the year with the lower VRM if you believe other factors will make that the better year. Please note, the 2023 apportionment will be based on the new 2020 census. Collecting service consumed in fiscal year 2021. If ride checkers normally sample for your agency, resume that sampling approach when your agency determines that it's safe. If your agency uses a machine collection method for unlinked passenger trips, such as registering fare boxes or automated passenger counters, or if your vehicle operators record ridership and are still able to do so safely, please continue to collect the data. If your agency moved to rear door boardings for safety and could not collect UPT or lost some UPT data as a result, please contact your NTD analyst to communicate the scope of the issue and discuss potential remedies. If you can collect data without violating your agency's safety policies, the normal rules apply. If you are an annual sampler and you use in-person ride checkers, then you should restart sampling when you determine that it's safe. And until then, you should work with your analyst to determine a reasonable method to estimate. If you're a triennial sampler, then you are set until 2023. We all hope that by the beginning of fiscal year 2023, it'll be safe for everyone to sample. If it isn't, we'll deal with that contingency as it approaches. For now, we're assuming everyone can sample in 2023. Some agencies use automatic passenger counters, or APCs, to collect data. If so, please note that the FTA requires you to certify the APCs and recertify every 3 years. The next APC recertification year is fiscal year 2022. Sampling for APCs does not take a full year, and most agencies are able to complete it in 2 to 3 months. The recertification report is due with your 2022 annual report. So for October reporters, it's due October 31st, 2022. So in most cases, if you start in spring or summer of 2022, you'll be on time. But of course, if you don't believe it's safe to complete the sampling, please don't do it. And if you aren't able to meet this requirement for 2022, your analyst can help you request a waiver to push it to the following year, 2023. Many agencies have suspended or curtailed ride sharing in order to facilitate social distancing, especially on modes that don't have many shared rides in the first place, like taxis or TNC service. Some agencies might have stopped sharing rides completely during the pandemic. If this is a temporary suspension and your policy is to resume ride sharing once the pandemic ends, then FTA is still considering that service to be public transportation, and you should continue reporting it to the NTD. We do ask that you let your analysts know about any limitation to ride sharing, just so we have the context for why your service characteristics have changed. Some agencies are deploying extra buses to reduce crowding in order to facilitate social distancing. You might call this double heading or shadow buses. This is when you dispatch 2 buses to a route instead of 1. The second bus might be open to passengers from the start, or it might just follow along until the first bus reaches its capacity and then open. You also might not schedule a double-header bus, but might just dispatch them as needed in response to daily conditions. All of these cases are reported the same. The extra bus miles and hours are considered revenue service and should be included with VRM and VRH. Travel to the start of the route and back from the end of the route is considered to be deadhead, and deadhead miles and hours should not be included as revenue miles and revenue hours. A slightly different way of accomplishing the same thing is to have a floater bus stationed at a convenient location and then dispatched to the route if it's needed. If the floater bus does get dispatched, then its deadhead and revenue service hours, miles and hours, get reported just like on the previous slide. However, if the floater bus is not needed and just returns to the garage without being used, you should not report any of the miles for that bus. Finally, on the A30 form, you report seating and standing capacity for your vehicles. The purpose of the form is to reflect the characteristics of the asset, not any temporary policies. So if you made a policy of reducing the capacity of the vehicle during the pandemic, do not make any changes to the A30 form. Now we will discuss changes to the NTD reporting system. One change for this year will be the use of login.gov to log into the NTD reporting site. You should have already received an initial notification about this update last week. We're making this change because an executive order mandated the use of multi-factor authentication for federal agencies. Please note that the NTD reporting site will not change. You will still access the same NTD login page. Instead of entering a username and password on the login page, you will click a link for external users. This will direct you to the login.gov login page. You will be redirected back to the NTD site after logging in to login.gov. The next change we'll address is the multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is the use of other authentication methods in addition to a password when logging onto a site. You will need to set up a login.gov account using your NTD username to retain your current NTD roles. When setting up your login.gov account, you will be required to select at least one authentication option. The options for login.gov include a security key, which is like a physical device similar to a USB that you plug into your computer. You can use an authentication application, which is an app on your computer or your phone that generates codes you use to sign into your account. Several examples of these are Google Authenticator, Authy, or LastPass. You can also enter your phone number to receive either a text message or a phone call with a code to use to log into your account. And the last option is backup codes. which are the least secure option. You'll receive a set of codes, and you'll enter one of those codes when you sign in. Each code can only be used once, and when you run out of codes, you'll be prompted to download a new list. You will receive more details and instructions along with the cutover date as we prepare for this transition. So please look out for those via email. We have added several new funding sources to the RR20 form to reflect 3 acts that were passed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. These 3 funding sources are the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, also known as CARES Act, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, also known as CRISA, and the American Rescue Plan, also known as ARP. These items appear under the 5307, 5310, and 5311 funding sources on the RR20 form. Next, we will address the organization address. This change is more of a new feature in the operating system, but it does have an impact on the P10 form. You may be aware that FTA recently updated the Transit Agency Profile Identification Form P10 to query information from sam.gov. The system now allows you to pull in information from that system. Please do not save the form if the information that returns does not reflect the physical address of your agency. Please either revert or enter the information manually. This slide provides some clarification to condition assessments. In the last report year 2020, FTA waived the requirement to report condition assessments for a total of 75% of facilities for which the agency has capital responsibility. A minimum of 25% of additional condition assessments would have normally been expected in the 4-year transit asset management cycle. FTA clarified that while it was waiving this requirement universally in report year 2020, agencies should still report all condition assessments or 100% of facilities for which the agency has capital responsibility by the end of the cycle. This is by the end of the upcoming year. FTA recognizes that in some cases, this may not have been possible due to safety concerns. Condition assessments may have been rescheduled. If this applies to your agency, please contact your validation analyst and request a template for a data waiver. This slide is a reminder of the TAM phase-in schedule. As mentioned, this is the final year of the first cycle, so all elements you see listed here are required to be reported to the NTD. Please note there's a typo on the last row under the second column for setting internal targets. For report year 2021, setting internal targets should read required for fiscal year 22. The last update will be coming later in summer of 2022. As a result of the 2020 census, urbanized areas will be redefined. We will send you a task after the 2021 report year closes out. This task will allow you to reallocate your federal funding data based on the 2020 urbanized areas. The data that you will reallocate will be either your 2019 or 2021 data, depending on which year you choose in the apportionment year selection page. We will provide updates as we get closer. Now we will cover the NTD Online Reporting System. This is the NTD homepage for those who aren't familiar. It's transit.dot.gov/NTD. There are 2 links on this page that will allow you to access the reporting system. One on the left and one on the middle right of the page. Once you log into the reporting system, you will land on the home screen and be able to set a default system by clicking on the star. From the home screen, you can access your agency's annual report and your agency profile. The agency profile is a frequently accessed part of the NTD system. This houses data that typically doesn't change from year to year, such as your basic information, the modes you operate, the users who need access to the report, and historical reports. You can access the profile by clicking on the Home tab at the top of the page and then selecting Profile. Next, you will see your agency's profile link. When you click on the link, you will then land on the profile summary page. This page contains your analyst's name, phone number, and email address, as well as your agency's basic information. At the top of the profile section, you'll see two important tabs, the eFile Library tab and the Form Library tab. The eFile Library contains historical requests like extension requests or the agency's fiscal year updates. The Form Library contains your agency's reports from previous years. If you need to access the 2020 report for reference while completing the 2021 report, do this through the Form Library. Another important tab is the Related Actions tab. The Related Actions tab allows you to edit your agency's profile information, like your basic information, modes, or users. To edit your modes, select Related Actions and then select the View and Manage Reporter Modes link for the P20 form. If you'd like to add a new mode to your agency profile, select Add Mode at the bottom of the screen. You will not need to add the same mode year over year, as this data will be retained in the system. Select the mode from a drop-down menu, such as bus, demand response, etc. Select whether the service is directly operated by your agency or contracted out as purchased transportation. Enter the commitment date, which is a date when your agency first committed capital funds towards the mode, and enter the start date, which is the first date of revenue service. Do not enter an end date if the service is still in operation. Only enter an end date if the service has been terminated. Please note that your agencies cannot delete modes from the profile once they've been added. You may edit modes directly in this form by selecting a field you wish to update. You may add an end date if the service has ceased operation, or update the commitment date or start dates if needed. Lastly, we will review the user roles in the NTD system. The user roles are as follows: CEO, NTD contact, editor, viewer, and CEO delegate if applicable. The CEO delegate role is optional for all agencies and requires FTA approval. The CEOs and CEO delegates have the highest level of access and permissions in the system, including the ability to create reporter requests like waivers or extension requests. CEOs have the ability to submit the report as well as review and edit report forms and issues. NTD contacts have the same permissions as CEOs, aside from creating reporter requests and submitting the original submission or first draft of the report. Editors may only revise and save forms, while viewers may only view forms. You may disregard the safety roles like safety contact or safety editor, as urban reduced reporters do not report safety data through the safety module. Reporters are required to certify all of their users when they begin the report. All user managers must do this. This is consistent among all FTA FACES applications, such as TRAMS and ECHO. Please consult the FACES user guide on FTA's program website for more information. Next, we will dive into starting the report year. The first step in completing the annual report is completing the report year kickoff. This process officially launches the current report year. After your fiscal year ends, your agency's CEO and NTD contact will receive a task in the system to complete the kickoff. This process will generate the report package for the year after you confirm your agency's information. First, the CEO or NTD contact will select the Task tab. You will complete the 2022 Report Year Kickoff to generate the 2021 Report Package Forms. You will first need to accept the task and select Proceed. The first step in this process is confirming or editing your agency's users for the year. You can add users or edit existing contact information as needed. The next step is confirming or editing your agency's modes for the year. You can add new modes if you started a new service or end modes if a service had ceased operations. Please do not update this section to reflect your fiscal year. This is a common reporting mistake. The next step is managing your 2021 Transit Asset Management Group Plan sponsor. If you are participating in a group transit asset management plan, confirm your sponsor from the 2020 report year here. If you are completing your own transit asset management plan, you can simply click Continue. If you need to remove the sponsor from last year or select a new one, please contact your analyst. Next, you'll confirm your reporter type for 2021. If you were a small systems reporter last year, ensure that No is selected under Change Type, as your reporter type will not be changing. Select the same answer for your 2022 reporter type, and then hit the Submit button to complete the report year kickoff. This will generate your 2021 report package forms. The system typically takes a couple of minutes to complete this function, so be sure to check your forms after allowing a little bit of time. Next, we will review annual form navigation. To access your 2021 report package, first select the Home tab at the top of the page and then select Annual. You will then select the 2021 report package link. Once the report package summary page opens, select Annual Forms in the top right-hand corner. This will open a list of report package forms. To open a form, you'll select the form link. This is a list of forms you will see in your report package, which we will review one by one. The first form in each report package is the B10 Identification Form. The first step on this form is to select your agency's organization type from the drop-down menu. Examples of available organization types include city, county, or local government unit, or independent public agency or authority of transit service. After you've selected your agency's organization type, you will report your demographic information. This includes service area square miles and service area population. The data points for the service area should represent your agency's true service area for transit service and not the data for your particular urbanized area. To complete your demographic information, you will report data related to your urbanized areas or UZAs. Your primary UZA will be pre-populated in the form. You can add secondary urbanized areas as applicable by clicking the Add UZA button. If your agency has any modes that will be captured in another NTD report, you will report them in the Modes Filing Separately section. If this does not apply to your agency, please leave this section blank. Please consult your analyst before adding any new modes filing separately on this form. Lastly, if your agency owns capital assets that are used in another NTD reporter service, you will report the agency where they are used in the separate assets section on the B10 form. Again, if this does not apply to your agency, please leave this section blank. Next, we will cover the B30 Contractual Relationship Form. The B30 form captures information about contractual relationships. These are the relationships where transit service is provided to an agency or government unit from a public or private transportation provider based on a written contract. The buyer of service will be the transit agency that pays another entity to perform service. Please note, if the buyer of service only pays a portion of the cost to operate service, it should not be reported as a contract. The seller of service will be the entity that provides service on behalf of another agency. The seller may be public or a private entity. The NTD has specific criteria for service that may be reported as a contract. The criteria are as follows. A written agreement exists that, number one, obligates the seller to provide the operations for a specific monetary consideration. Number two, specifies a contractual relationship for a certain time period in service. Three, obligates the seller to provide the buyer operating statistics required by the NTD annual report. And four, the authorized representatives of both the buyer and seller must sign the written agreement. Buyers must pay full cost of the service in order to report the service as a contract to the NTD. Also, the service must be branded under the transit agency buying the service. In order to add a B30 to your report package, you will click on the Add Contractual Relationship button at the top of your report package summary dashboard. All B30 forms from previous years will generate during your report year kickoff as part of your report package. There are two types of B30 forms, one for van pool modes and one for non-van pool modes. Once you have selected Add Contractual Relationships, the first step is to select whether the contractual relationship is with another agency who reports to the NTD or is a private company. Then you'll click Continue. If your B30 is with another NTD reporter, you must select the contracted agency from a list generated by the NTD database. You can also search for the provider in the search bar. At the top of the B30 form is the contract summary. The first selection to make is your contractual position. This indicates whether your agency is the buyer of service or seller of service. Once you have selected your position, you will report whether the contract was negotiated or competitively bid. This should refer to when the contract was awarded, even if the option years have been exercised. Then you will select the primary feature of the contract, or how does the buyer compensate the seller? There are two options here. The buyer pays the seller a negotiated fixed rate per unit of service, or the buyer reimburses the seller's net operating expenses based on an approved budget. You will select one of these options from the drop-down menu. Next, you will indicate whether the service statistics will be reported in your NTD report or in another NTD report. If you're reporting the service data in your own NTD report, select the In This Report option. If another NTD reporting agency will be capturing the service data, select In Another Report. Next, you will indicate whether the seller keeps the fares or the seller returns the fares collected to the buyer. The last selection for the contract summary is to indicate any public assets provided to the seller by the buyer, if applicable. These may be vehicles, maintenance facilities, or other public assets. If you select Other, you will be required to provide a description of the public assets provided. The next section of the B30 form is where you will add each mode as part of the contract. These modes do not carry over from the previous year and must be added to your B30 form each new report year. You may only add active modes from your P20 form or modes listed as filing separately on your B10 form. You will click the Add New Mode and Type of Service button at the bottom left of your screen. Then you will select the appropriate mode and type of service from the drop-down. Next, you will click Edit on the right-hand column to open up the key financial and operating statistics field. There are several parts of the key financial and operating statistics section. First, you will report the number of vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs. This should represent the highest number of vehicles operated at any given point during the year, excluding special events or atypical service days. Then you'll indicate how many months the seller provided the service during the year. Next, you'll report the amount of fare revenues generated by the service. You should report the total amount of fares collected regardless of whether the buyer or seller retains the fares. Then you'll report the total payment to the contractor and the direct payment line. This should be the total amount paid directly from the buyer to the seller without netting out any capital leasing or other expenses. Next, you will indicate the amount of capital leasing expenses for the contract. Capital leasing costs are expenses that the seller charges the buyer for use of its capital assets, such as vehicles or maintenance facilities. If the buyer provides all the assets, this does not apply. If you're the buyer of service, you will record any costs your agency incurs for overseeing the contract under the other operating expenses incurred by the buyer field. This should include general administration costs to oversee the contract and any other applicable expenses. And lastly, you report any leases and rental expenses and the other reconciling items incurred by the buyer field. This will be for expenses such as vehicle rentals. The next form we will review is the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. The first section of the A10 form begins by reporting your passenger station data. If applicable, you'll report the number of ADA accessible and non-accessible stations, as well as the number of elevators and escalators used by the public. Passenger stations must be significant structures in separate right-of-ways in order to be reportable. Please note, bus stops or bus shelters do not count as passenger stations. Next, you will report a count of your agency's maintenance facilities used to support revenue service. This will include any owned or leased maintenance facilities. You will report facilities by the ownership type, facility type, and capacity. If your agency uses one maintenance facility for multiple modes, you will need to prorate the facility based on the amount of vehicles it serves. For example, if an agency operates a demand response mode and a bus mode that uses the same maintenance facility, this facility would need to be prorated between the bus A10 form and demand response A10 form. To further explain, if the two modes have a combined total of 20 vehicles, 15 of which are used for demand response and 5 which are used for the bus mode, the demand response A10 form would reflect 0.75 of the facility, and the bus A10 form would reflect 0.25 of the facility. This is determined by taking the number of vehicles for each mode and dividing it by the total number of vehicles for all modes. And with that being said, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dan Barnes.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, now we will talk about the A15 Facilities Inventory Form. In the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory, or A15 form, you will report all administrative and maintenance facilities for which you have capital replacement responsibility and greater than incidental use. Also, you are to report all passenger facilities that your agency uses in revenue service, regardless of capital replacement responsibility. A few common examples of facility types are administrative buildings, which are the offices that house executive management and supporting activities for transit operations, combined administrative and maintenance facilities, which are facilities that combine the functions of both an admin and maintenance facility, and finally, maintenance facilities. These are facilities where routine and heavy maintenance on vehicles are performed. When adding a new facility to the A15 form, you will need to complete all required fields, which we will review. To get started, click Add New. There will be 3 sections to fill out for each facility: facility information, condition assessment, and address. Clicking Add New will first bring you to the Update Facility Information section, where you will click on Add Facility. Next, you will fill out the name of the facility. You can write it whatever you'd like that makes it easily identifiable for you. Then you'll fill out the primary mode that this facility serves. If the facility serves more than one mode, you should choose a primary mode that it predominantly serves. And in the next field, you can identify any other mode served as a secondary mode. Secondary modes should be added for any other modes that the facility serves, or it can be left blank if it does not serve any other modes. The secondary mode field is not a drop-down menu, so you will need to start typing before options appear. Next, you can identify any private modes that share use of the facility. The options for these non-public transit modes are airport, private bus, private rail, and private water transit. An example of private bus would be Greyhound. An example of private rail would be Amtrak. Here, you will choose the facility type from the drop-down menu. You should select the facility type that fits your facility best. A list of facility type descriptions is available in the policy manual starting on page 97. If you have questions about which facility type you should select, please contact your analyst. You will then report the year that the facility was built or reconstructed, the square footage, number of parking spaces, percentage of your agency's capital responsibility, and any notes you deem necessary. If you share capital responsibility, you should explain who you share it with in the notes section. Next, you should click Continue to go to the condition assessment section of the form. Here, you will report the condition assessment for the facility on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being excellent and 1 being poor. If you do not have a condition assessment for the facility, please select NA from the drop-down menu. If you would like guidance on how to complete a condition assessment, please refer to the TAM Facility Performance Measuring Reporting Guidebook, which can be found on NTD's website. Once you have selected the condition assessment rating, you should select the estimated date on which you conducted this assessment. Lastly, you should click on the Update Address tab or click Continue to fill out the facility's address information. You may report either the street address of the facility or the latitude and longitude. Once all the information has been added, you can click Continue to add the facility to your A15 form. You can review or edit information for any of your facilities by clicking on the facility name from the main A15 landing summary page. Please always remember to save your changes by clicking Save or Save and Validate. Now, we will review the A30 Revenue Vehicle Inventory Form. Each year, you should review and update the A30 form by adding any new vehicles or retiring any vehicles that are no longer in service at your agency. The form will pre-populate all revenue vehicle fleets from the previous report year. If you need to add a new fleet, you will select the Add New Fleet button. First, you will report the basic information about that fleet. If there are multiple vehicles in a fleet, these vehicles should be identical across all specifications. You will select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu of options. Then, you will report the number of total vehicles and active vehicles in the fleet. Active vehicles should include all vehicles that are available to provide revenue service, including your spares. Next, you will select the ownership type. This will include options such as owned or leased, and whether the vehicles are owned or leased by a public agency or private entity. Then, you will select the funding type. This should represent the largest funding source of the vehicle fleet. There are several options for funding type, including FTA grant programs, other federal funds, and non-federal funds. If you do not have capital responsibility for the fleet, you should check the No Capital Replacement Responsibility box. If vehicles in a fleet can operate without any human input, you should check the automated or autonomous vehicles box. This selection will not apply to the majority of reporters. Once you have entered the basic information, you will report the vehicle information. This includes the fleet's model, length, seating and standing capacities, fuel type, manufacturer, and year manufacturer. Some vehicles have multiple manufacturers. Agencies must report the final manufacturer and model. For example, for a cutaway vehicle, you should report the cutaway body manufacturer and model, since that is the final manufacturer of the vehicle. You should not report the manufacturer model of that vehicle's chassis. If you have questions about how to report these data points for your fleets, please contact your analyst for guidance. And as a note, if your agency reports a year rebuilt for a vehicle fleet, you are required to indicate the type of rebuild that was performed. In each vehicle fleet, you will see useful life benchmark, as well as useful life remaining in the vehicle information section. Useful life benchmark is the expected life cycle or the acceptable period of which in service for an asset, as determined by your agency or the default benchmark provided by FTA. Please note that this measure takes into account your unique operating environment, including your geographic location, the frequency of your service, and your climate. Because of this, useful life benchmark is not the same as useful life for FTA grant programs, which typically defines the minimum age at which equipment can be retired. Useful life benchmark will automatically populate a default value when you select the vehicle type. For example, the vehicle type for this fleet is selected as bus. The standard useful life benchmark for buses as defined by FTA is 14 years. Thus, a value of 14 will populate in this field. Agencies then have the option to report a value that is different from the default. Useful life remaining will automatically populate once you report the year a fleet was manufactured. Please note that useful life remaining is not an editable field. This value is calculated based on the year manufactured and the useful life benchmark fields. Lastly, you will report the mileage information. This includes miles this year, which should reflect all mileage incurred by the fleet during the fiscal year, and average lifetime miles, which is the average total mileage per active vehicle in the fleet. Now let's go over some of the features of the A30 form. Average lifetime miles can be calculated for the current report year in two ways. If the prior year's average lifetime miles were accurate, you can divide the miles this year value by the number of active vehicles in your fleet and add that result to the previous year's average lifetime miles data point. Otherwise, you can simply take the average of all ending odometer readings for the active vehicles in the fleet if the odometers have been working properly for the entire lives of those vehicles. If you need to edit an existing fleet, you will first click on the link of the fleet's revenue vehicle inventory, or RVI ID. This will open a dropdown where you will then be able to update any fields as necessary. For agencies that share fleets between modes, you can copy fleets from one A30 to another by selecting the Add Existing Fleet option. The system will populate all fleets that may be shared between modes. If a fleet is no longer in service and needs to be retired, you should not delete the fleet from the A30 form. What you should do is change your active vehicle's value to 0 and then select Yes for the Is this fleet retired question that will pop up in the bottom right-hand corner of your fleet details. If a fleet is out for repairs and will be coming back into service, you should still update active vehicles to 0, but you should select No to Is this fleet retired. Finally, fleets should only be deleted from the A30 form if they were accidentally added to the report. If needed, you can delete a fleet by clicking on the red X next to the fleet entry. Next, we will cover the A35 Service Vehicle Inventory Form. The A35 form is where you report your agency's non-revenue vehicles that support your service. You should report all service vehicles for which your agency has capital responsibility. Service vehicles are roadworthy, self-propelled, or major pieces of construction equipment that support revenue operations, maintain revenue vehicles, or perform transit-oriented administrative activities. Similar to the A30 form, you can group service vehicles fleets by vehicles that are identical across all specifications. Service vehicles are grouped into three vehicle types: automobiles, trucks and other rubber tire vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. This form is not specific to modes, so you will only be required to complete one A30 form. If you want to add a new service fleet, first click Add New. Then click Add Service Fleet at the bottom left-hand side of the form. The first section of the fleet information is a Service Fleet Information tab. You will report the fleet name and agency fleet ID. These can be names and IDs that make the fleet easily identifiable for your agency. Similar to facilities on the A15 form, you must select a primary mode that the fleet supports. You can also report secondary modes as applicable. Then you will select the vehicle type for the fleet from the drop-down menu. Descriptions of these three vehicle types are available in the policy manual starting on page 119. Next, you will enter the number of total vehicles in the fleet. The useful life benchmark field will populate when you select the vehicle type. You may choose to enter your own figure in the useful life benchmark field. Now, report the year the fleet was manufactured and any notes as needed. Click Next Section to go to the next page, where you will report your agency's capital responsibility percentage for the fleet. If you have less than 100% capital responsibility, you must indicate who else has capital responsibility in the notes section. Lastly, enter the estimated cost for the vehicle fleet and the year dollars of estimated cost. For the estimated cost, you should report the full cost to replace the fleet, including soft costs such as financing charges. This value should be the most recent value the agency has, whether that is the original cost of the assets or the insured value. The year dollars of estimated cost figure means the year that your estimate is from. If you are using the original cost of the asset and it was purchased in 2012, your year dollars will be 2012. Next is the A90 Performance Measure Targets form. On the A90 form, you will report targets for your asset performance in the upcoming fiscal year. This form compares data from the current report year asset forms to the targets entered in the prior report year. You are also required to submit a narrative report that outlines your agency's progress towards your performance targets. The narrative report is required for all agencies with their own TAM plan and for group plan sponsors. This document will be attached at the bottom of the A90 form. The document should outline your agency's progress towards the targets that you set for 2021 and any conditions during the year that affected your progress. There is no prescribed format for this narrative. If you have any questions, please contact your analyst who can provide more resources. These are the categories that you will see in the A90 form. The sections are broken down into equipment, which represents service vehicles, rolling stock, which represents your revenue vehicles, facilities, which represent your passenger stations and other admin or maintenance facilities, and there's also infrastructure, which doesn't apply to reduced reporters as this pertains to rail. In the first section of the A90 form, you will report the target percentage of revenue vehicles that will have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark by 2022. The list of vehicle types will populate based on your active modes. If any vehicle type does not apply to your agency, you can check the NA checkbox in the right-hand column, and that row will become grayed out. In the equipment section, you will report the percentage of service vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark in 2022. Again, check the NA box for service vehicle types that your agency does not operate. In the facility section, you'll report the target percentage of facilities that will rate below a 3 on the Transit Economics Requirements Model, or term scale, in 2022. Check the NA box if a facility type does not apply to your agency. At the bottom of the A90, you will upload your agency's narrative report. You can upload the narrative report in most file formats. Now, we will cover the RR20 Reduced Reporting Form. This form includes financial, service, and safety data. There are several sections on the RR20 form, including fair revenues and directly generated funds, revenues accrued through a PC agreement, non-federal funds, federal government funds, service data, and safety data. The first section is where you will report financial data. First, you'll report the total annual expenses by mode and type of service. This should include all funds expended towards your public transit service. You will separate expenses by funds expended in operations and funds expended on capital. Please note that capital leasing expenses should not be included in either of these totals if you have a B30 form. In that case, the total funds expended at the top of the form will not match the sum of funds expended by mode and type of service, which you enter here. Next, you will report fair revenues by mode and type of service. Fair revenues should include all income received directly from passengers, including cash or prepaid tickets, reduced or subsidized fares, donations made on board the vehicle, and any organization fares such as agreements arranged by colleges or universities. With the updated USOA in effect since report year 2018, agencies are required to report fare revenues in two categories: passenger paid fares and organization paid fares. Passenger paid fares consist of direct fares, including payments such as full adult fares or senior citizen fares. Organization paid fares include fares earned from organizations for providing transit service, such as universities, reduced fare reimbursements, or other special contract transit fares. You will then report the total of other directly generated funds in the next section. Some examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, or interest on investments. You must provide a detailed description of the funds reported in this section. Agencies should also include donations and insurance recoveries in this field. Insurance recoveries should include any insurance payouts, dividends or rebates, and funds that may be netted out towards future bills. The next section on the form is for PT agreement revenues, or revenues accrued through a purchase transportation agreement. You should only report a value in this field if your purchase transportation agreement meets NTD criteria for a full cost contract. This field is for revenues accrued by the seller of transportation services. This will not include passenger fares generated by the service. You should only report a value in this field if you are the seller or operator of purchase transportation. If this field applies to your agency, you will indicate whether the revenues came from another NTD reporting agency or a non-NTD reporting agency. Next, you will report your non-federal funds. This includes local funds, state funds, and other funds. If you report funds under other, you will be required to provide a detailed description of the source of funding. The last portion of the financial data section is federal funds. You will first select the applicable federal funding sources on the left side of the form. Once you do so, fields will populate to the right side of the form for data entry. Once you have determined the appropriate sources, you will enter the data for each federal funding source. As a reminder, you will need to report funds expended on operations and funds expended on capital in separate columns. Please note, if you select an other option, such as other FTA funds or other US DOT funds or other federal funds, you'll be required to provide a description of the original source program. Some examples of these other sources may be FHWA funds or Medicaid funds. Next, you'll report service data. You are required to report annual vehicle revenue miles, annual vehicle revenue hours, annual unlinked passenger trips, and annual vehicles operated in maximum service. Sponsored trips are designated for demand response and demand taxi modes. Vehicle revenue miles and hours should include the miles and hours when the vehicle is in revenue service, including miles and hours incurred during layover and recovery time. Revenue miles and hours should not include deadhead, operator training, school bus or charter services, or vehicle maintenance testing. Here, you will see a table that illustrates what is considered revenue service, both miles and hours, for a demand response service. For example, when the vehicle departs the dispatching point to pick up a passenger, this is not considered revenue miles or hours. This is deadhead. However, on the third row of the table, when the vehicle arrives at a pickup point and waits for the passenger, this would be considered vehicle revenue hours. This next table outlines examples of revenue service for a bus mode. When the bus is traveling on its route during scheduled revenue operation, this will be considered vehicle revenue hours and revenue miles, even if passengers do not board the vehicle. On the fourth row, there is an example of deadhead. Once the bus arrives at the end of the route and deadheads back to the storage lot to park, this is not considered revenue service. You can reference these tables for both demand response and bus in the policy manual starting on page 69. Unlinked passenger trips should represent the total number of boardings on your agency's vehicles while providing public transit. Please remember that these are not linked trips, so every time a passenger boards a vehicle, it is considered one unlinked passenger trip. The last section of the RR20 form is the safety data section. You will report any reportable events that meet one of the following criteria: an event that results in a fatality, an injury, $25,000 or more in damages, a collision that results in the towing of a transit vehicle or another vehicle involved, or an evacuation for life safety reasons. Fatalities should be reported if they occur within 30 days of the event, and injuries are reported when passengers are transported away from the scene for medical attention. Now we will cover some common validation issues with service data. The first is reporting scheduled hours or available service hours instead of actual revenue hours. You should report actual vehicle revenue hours and not scheduled hours. A second common validation issue is reporting vehicle revenue miles based on average route distance. Agencies should be tracking actual revenue miles, not calculating an estimate. A third issue relates to deadhead. Agencies should not include deadhead in an annual vehicle revenue miles or annual vehicle revenue hours. Deadhead includes the time in miles where leaving the garage to go pick it to the first point of revenue service, returning to the garage from the last point of revenue service, or anytime the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. If you have questions about what to include in your service totals, please contact your analyst. Next, we will cover the FFA-10 form, Federal Funding Allocation Statistics. On this form, you will report the vehicle revenue miles, hours, ridership, and operating expenses broken down by each UZA that you serve. You will complete one FFA-10 form for each mode. The UZAs will populate based on your agency's B10 form. If you provide service within one UZA or one non-UZA, you will report all of your service to that area. If you operate in more than one area, you'll report all of the data statistics for that route to the UZA or non-UZA that is primarily served. Or you can allocate the data statistics proportionally to the UZAs and non-UZAs served. For further information on serve rules and the allocating to different UZAs, please refer to the NTD serve rules in our policy manual. Here, you will see an example of an FFA-10 form with only one UZA. There is one column to enter all of the data. And here's an example of an FFA-10 form with two UZAs. There will be two columns for you to allocate your data between the UZAs. You will see on the left side of the form each data point that you will report: vehicle revenue hours, or VRH, on-lake passenger trips, UPT, vehicle revenue miles, VRM, and operating expenses, OE. You will first select your UZA reporting method. There are three options: actual data, actual vehicle revenue miles, or other. For actual data, this means that your agency tracks 100% of vehicle revenue hours, vehicle revenue miles, on-lake passenger trips, and operating expenses between all of the UZAs that you serve. Actual vehicle revenue miles means that your agency only tracks VRM operated in each UZA. The system will then automatically allocate the remaining data points, such as VRH, UPT, and operating expenses, based on the VRM data that you report. The last option, other, means that your agency used another methodology to track data between UZAs, and you must provide a description on this method. If you select actual data, you will need to manually enter the values for VRH, UPT, VRM, and OE into both UZA columns. If you select vehicle revenue miles, you may only report VRM to each UZA. The other data points will automatically be allocated. You will report the amount of VRM in each UZA column. If you select other, allocate your data accordingly and then provide a description of your methodology. The last form in the report package is the D10 CEO Certification Form. This form should be completed by your agency's CEO. First, you will need to confirm the accuracy of your NTD report. Here, you will confirm that your reported data is in accordance with NTD policy and the Uniform System of Accounts. Now, you will review the criteria listed in options A through G and ensure that the data meets these requirements. You will select yes or no for each mode operated. Next is the section of the D10 that pertains to the IASFD, or Independent Auditor Statement for Financial Data. You will first indicate whether or not you have an existing IASFD within the last 10 years. If you completed one last year or have one from the last 10 years, you will select yes to the first question and proceed to the next section of the form. Please note that every 10 years rule became a requirement in the 2018 report year. If you do not have an existing IASFD, you will indicate whether or not your agency has a waiver for this audit for the current report year. If you did not receive a waiver, the last question will appear and you can upload your newly completed IASFD document directly into the system. You will need to complete the date that it was completed and who it was completed by. If you have not completed your audit, please select no to the first 3 questions on the screen and then enter the anticipated completion date in the explanation box. This allows you to explain why the audit has not been completed yet and when your agency expects to have it completed. Lastly, you will review the data collection method for unlinked passenger trips. There are several methods, the most common being 100% count of unlinked passenger trips. The other options are an alternative sampling method, the NTD sampling method, APC data, or none of the options listed, which you would then provide a description for. Please note, most reduced reporters do not sample for UPT. If you are unsure of what method to select, please consult with your analyst for guidance. Once you have determined the method that your agency uses, you will select a choice from the drop-down menu. If using any automatic passenger counter or APC data for UPT for your modes, please check the Used APC data box, which is a new field. If this is the last section of the D10 form. Now we will cover how to submit your agency's NTD report once the forms are completed. Please note that completing the forms in the report package or completing the D10 form does not submit your report. Once the report is finalized, navigate to the report package summary page and select related actions. Please note that only the CEO or CEO delegate may submit the original submission, which is the first submission of the report. The NTD contact may submit all subsequent reports during the revision process. Once related actions is open, select Submit Annual Report Package. If the report is complete and there are no outstanding issues with the data, you will be able to confirm the report package submission by clicking Continue. Next, you will be asked to choose whether or not to use all of your 2019, 2020 if you did not report year 2019, or all of your 2021 data in the 2023 apportionment. Whichever data is selected will be used to apportion funds for federal fiscal year 2023. Finally, to complete the submission process, you will click Submit. Once the report is submitted, you will receive a notification that says action completed successfully. You can confirm that the package was submitted if the package is listed as in review rather than in working data on the report package summary page. Lastly, we will cover the validation process and what happens with your report after you submit the original submission. Your assigned NTD analyst will validate your completed report for any deviations from the reporting requirements, missing data, or data irregularities. This includes whether the data fluctuated significantly from the prior report year, if any forms do not contain all of the necessary information, or if any data elements were reported in the incorrect field. Prior to submitting the report, agencies may take advantage of their resources to reduce the time dedicated to report validation. This includes contacting your analyst prior to submission so that they may review your data in advance. You may also refer to report checklists included in your welcome packet, which contain common validation errors and other items to look out for before submitting. It is typical for a report to go through a few revision cycles before being closed out. Your analyst will almost always return the original submission for data revisions or clarifications. Once the report is ready to be sent to FTA for approval, it will either be sent as a clean closeout, which means there were no issues with the report, or it will be a closeout with issues, which means there were some outstanding issues that could not be resolved prior to the report year closeout. The issues are cited in your closeout letter, and your agency will be expected to resolve them by the following report year. Looking ahead to the 2021 report year, you can expect a welcome email from your analyst as your due date approaches. This email will include a packet containing helpful tips as well as the reporter checklist. Your analyst will also provide guidance in completing, submitting, and validating the report until it is closed out. Please do not hesitate to reach out with questions. Thank you very much for tuning in. Again, here's the contact information for the NTD Help Desk line. We're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. We will now open up for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, please put your question in the Q&A box, not the chat box. There is a question in there right now from S. Patel from Franklin Transit Authority. Is there an estimated date for when the annual forms will be available?
Yes, they should be available mid-September.
Great. Thank you. Just pause a minute and see if any other questions are forthcoming. I see in the participant list that Lizette has a raised hand. If you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A box or, oh, no longer, hand is down. Okay. So just wait another little bit to make sure nobody's typing frantically. In the meantime, I will tell you that everyone will be getting a link to take a survey evaluation for this session, probably in the next day or so. If you could just take a few minutes and fill that out, NTI would greatly appreciate it. And also, you can check our website for additional upcoming NTD webinars. There may be more topics that are of use or interest to you. Our website is www.ntionline.com. Is it .com? You think I would know our website? I'm just blanking out right now. Yes, .com. Sorry. Rutgers is .edu, and I got confused for a second. Cognitive dissonance. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or the Q&A box, so I guess we'll wrap this up. If anyone does have questions after the session, the information is on the slide. It's the last slide of the handouts. You might have to, put on glasses to read it. I don't know how tiny it is. It shouldn't be that bad. And also, it was I was privately chatted. This recording should be available, I would say, early next week on NTI's YouTube page. And if you don't know that URL, there's a little tiny YouTube tab in the top right of our website. And also you can go to www.youtube.com/user/Rutgers NTI. And I will paste that in the chat box as well. And I guess that does it for today's webinar. Thank you so much, Matt and Dan. We really appreciate your presentation. It was very informative. Panelist team, thank you for answering questions in the background. And I guess have a good afternoon, and we'll see everybody next time. Thank you.
Just before everybody signs off here, I just want to say, thank you very much for everybody for attending this. We appreciate the participation. If you guys have any further questions or any questions regarding this webinar that was just completed, Matt's and my information is found on slide 4, I believe, of this presentation. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, if you can't get a hold of your analyst, or if you want to talk to us about anything. We're here to help. And again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Guys. Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thanks.
guys, for all of your time.
Bye, everyone. Be safe. Be well.
Thanks, Lori.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lori.